Hello, everyone, and welcome to the February 2026 version session of the Korea Peace Study Group. I'm glad to have all of you here, really grateful, and have been looking forward all week to this discussion. We're going to be talking today about the Donroe Doctrine. So just a little bit of background. And if you're like me, you probably didn't enjoy reading this document, but thank you for reading it. We will get into some critical analysis of it, but first we're going to summarize. I just want to give a little bit of a background about why I call this Donroe Doctrine Pivot to the Americas, because in November 2011, the Obama administration began what they called a pivot to Asia. They recognized the rapid economic expansion going on in Asia, and America and American corporations wanted a large piece of that pie. Also recognizing China's rise as both an economic and military power, the US wanted to contain them and surround them throughout the Indian and Pacific Oceans. So that was the pivot to Asia. And it's actually been a huge part of US foreign policy for the last 15 years. However, since coming back into office last January, Donald Trump has given a lot of foreign policy attention to the Western Hemisphere, as you know, if you've been watching the news. He renamed the Gulf of Mexico. He claimed that Panama owes us something. He threatened to make Canada the 51st state, tried to buy Greenland, sunk boats, killed people extrajudicially in the Caribbean. He kidnapped Venezuela's president and he laid claim to their oil, and now he's tightening the chokehold on Cuba. That's just the beginning. So this US national security strategy will describe all of this as justified in the name of the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, or as people who can't remember that, like Donald Trump, say, the Donroe Doctrine. Suffice to say, it seems like the Trump administration is making its own pivot, this time back to the Americas, and we're going to explore that together today. First, I'll try to break it down a little bit with some historical context about the original Monroe Doctrine, and then the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which followed that. And finally, we'll dive into Trump's Donroe Doctrine. Through discussion after that, we're going to summarize what we learned from the national security strategy, and then I'll introduce a few themes that I see which directly relate to Asia and will have bearing on our ongoing struggle for peace on the Korean Peninsula. So let's get started. The Monroe Doctrine was introduced by President James Monroe in 1823, less than 50 years after US independence from England. Initially, through this doctrine, the USA postured itself as opposed to further European colonialism anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. That doctrine also promised not to intervene in European wars or with already established European colonies in the West. So during those years, the US and Western hemispheres were not peaceful, but they focused on US westward expansion. That was our Indian Wars, war with Mexico, eventually the Civil War. And then if you fast forward past our Reconstruction after the Civil War to the late 1890s, this is a period often referred to as the Gilded Age by historians. There was a huge wealth gap in 1890s America. Lots of wealth was situated in the hands of a few powerful men. At that time, the Deputy Naval Secretary, who was an ambitious man named Teddy Roosevelt, was campaigning at the War College for another war, this time to overthrow Spanish rule in the Caribbean and the Philippines. Now, Roosevelt's proposal was really in opposition to the Monroe Doctrine, because remember, the Monroe Doctrine pledged that the US would stay out of any kind of conflict with a colony that already existed, that Europe already had in the Western Hemisphere. But there was a problem. Teddy Roosevelt and many Americans at that time were explicitly indoctrinated with this racist education that taught a form of white supremacy that required men to maintain their vigor through warfare. So at the end of the Indian Wars, Teddy was thinking that the American white male would languish if he didn't have another fight to go into. So he also believed that it was the white man's burden to civilize the world. So he was making this argument for a war in Cuba based on that point. Let's see what I've got here. So William McKinley, who was the president at that time when Teddy Roosevelt was campaigning for war, McKinley, the same McKinley that Trump invoked in his inauguration ceremony and named a mountain after again. This McKinley was hesitant to go to war with Spain because it was in opposition to the Monroe Doctrine, right? But Americans thought very highly of themselves, of their exceptional selves, of their virtue and their decency, and they were willing to send their troops to fight for a noble cause. So the press began to share the plight of Cubans fighting for their independence from Spanish rule, and American soldiers rallied to the cause. You can see here that US media was awash in pro-war propaganda. They depicted Cubans as like a vulnerable woman looking to the US for protection. And popular literature at the time also praised Cuba's courageous liberation fighters. So American troops wanted a piece of that action, and even Teddy Roosevelt left his post at the Navy and went to fight on the ground in Cuba for this war that he'd lobbied for. But when these troops get to Cuba and find out that there's a lot of Black liberation fighters here, they're really troubled by that because according to this ideology that they have been indoctrinated in, white people need to lead. So they change their tune. All the newspapers now, instead of depicting Cuba as this, white woman who needs help and needs saving, now they're depicting these Cuban fighters as lazy and troublesome. So the Spanish are eventually defeated, not really from huge help by the USA, but the US backstabs those liberation fighters and deems them unfit for self-rule. Yeah, so they went ahead and told everybody that they were taking over for humanity's sake, right? We got Puerto Rico at that point, went on to take the Philippines. So that's just a little history of the Monroe Doctrine and how Teddy Roosevelt shifted the Monroe Doctrine. When he came into office and became president, Teddy introduced what he called the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. This was essentially giving America the role of being police officers in the Western Hemisphere. So when you think of the Monroe Doctrine, many people are thinking of that Roosevelt corollary. They're not thinking of fighting imperialism or staying out of European wars. They're thinking of control and policing in the Western Hemisphere, spheres of influence, this kind of talk. This was the birth of American imperialism, Roosevelt's corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. So now Trump is introducing his own corollary. We've already seen this legacy across South America, and it'll be interesting to see what Trump's will be. But Roosevelt used his corollary to intervene in Colombia and Panama and Honduras. And like I said, just expand American imperialism, always telling Americans it was in the interest of humanity. So there we are, being global police. Okay. All right, so our half of the globe, this is what Trump says in this document about the Trump corollary, that we want to ensure that the Western Hemisphere remains reasonably stable and well-governed enough to prevent and discourage mass migration to the United States. Basically, our half of the globe needs to be decent enough that most people don't want to come to America, to the United States of America. This is revealing the modern white nationalist ideology that's even underneath that statement, but it continues. That we want a hemisphere whose governments cooperate with us against narco-terrorist cartels and other transnational criminal organizations. So like the Roosevelt corollary, we want full rights to police here, right? We want even their governments to work for us or with us as law enforcement, or we want to take military action with impunity against their citizens on their sea or on their soil. Here it continues. We want a hemisphere that remains free of hostile foreign incursion or ownership of key assets, and that supports critical supply chains. And we want to ensure our continued access to key strategic locations. This is basically saying we don't want China to be able to share Central South American stuff and labor, but we want to be able to access that. We want access to the land, we want access to the resources. And he ends his corollary with this statement. In other words, we will assert and enforce this Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Yeah. Now let's move on to summarizing this whole document. It's only 29 pages. It's not too massive. I'd like to invite you all to participate in an interactive discussion at this point. You can unmute and speak up at any time. Rather than me summarizing this alone, I'm asking each of you to open up your notes or refer to the document. I dropped the link into the chat. We can summarize this together based on section headings. I'll start here just with a little bit about the introduction and some good news that I saw from this national security strategy. It wasn't that difficult to read. It's not as wonky as Biden's strategy was back in 2022. That being said, it lacks the depth, the clarity, and the organization of Biden's strategy. It also fails to mention human rights or the climate crisis in those terms, or in any way that actually reflects a sense of global interconnectedness and belonging to one another. It is squarely centered from the beginning on an undefined American interests. But as you keep reading, it becomes pretty clear that American interests is actually the term they're using to describe America's economic interests, and more specifically, the economic interests of private American companies and American capitalists. So at different points, particularly at the beginning, the document critiques historical foreign policy strategy. And as much as I wanted to appreciate that and even agreed with some points, I couldn't take those statements at face value. Here's one example. Right here on page 1, there is an apparent critique of so-called American foreign policy elites who convinced themselves that permanent American domination of the entire world was in the best interests of our country. So here they appear to be pushing back on that premise, and they say that the affairs of other countries are our concern only if their activities directly threaten our interests. I didn't think that sounded so bad. I liked that they use the term activities of other countries because it requires an action. So theoretically, as long as other countries aren't actively, directly threatening the United States, it kind of sounds like everybody can live and let live. But there's a key term here that I already mentioned, our interests. It's never defined in this document. Now let's look at the rest of that quote. In sum, not only did our elites pursue a fundamentally undesirable and impossible goal, in doing so, they undermined the very means necessary to achieve that goal, the character of our nation, upon which its power, wealth, and decency were built. So are they saying that that goal of world domination is terrible or not? The administration seems to be more concerned about the accusation of undermining the character of our nation. And character is a feeling word. It's a righteous word, but again, it's undefined, imprecise. Words like character and decency will drive this document. But here's a spoiler. Trump is no less interested in control and domination than were former foreign policy elites. Even though, yeah, we'll move on to summary. All right. National security strategy, this first section here. What should we want? If you open your notes or your document to page 3 to 5, Um, would someone be willing to summarize for us what this administration believes the United States should want?
Um, on section 2, it says they want the US to continue as an independent sovereign republic whose government secures the God-given natural rights of its citizens and prioritizes their well-beings and interests. But obviously this is like slightly in my opinion, the wording is not great because well, first of all, God is mentioned a few too many times in my for my liking for a document that also claims to have like freedom of religion. So it's very like based on other things the Trump administration has said and done. I am assuming this is like the Christian God, and that first was like a red flag to me. Otherwise, it says prioritizes their well-beings and interests, implying the US's. So, as you were saying, uh, very much America first, everyone else no kind of mentality, which continues throughout the whole document. So that's just like you're not being a team player. But again, from what I've read about Trump's other policies, like that makes sense. And then like saying, uh, we want to protect the country, the people, economy, of course, is mentioned. So,
That
yeah,
protector, that protector role.
exactly.
Yeah. Which, I mean, this is a national security strategy. So, of course, you're going to talk about protection. You're going to talk about, you don't want to, you want to preserve your country from military attacks from overseas. Like that's, you want to have an understanding. Okay, that all makes sense. Did anyone else notice anything in what kind of protection um, we should want?
The total border control.
Right. Total border control. Why?
Yes, immigrants are a threat.
There's a lot in here. There's so much in here. Anything else about what we should want based on this administration's perspective?
Like
Um,
military or like military intervention against any economic threat. Just like includes like, oh, other countries are investing in places and voting infrastructure and things are apparently threats throughout this, and like making deals with countries that we own and so forth.
Mhm. There's a lot of threats, a lot of threats. Even a country that's our adversary making a deal with someone, an economic deal with someone, that's a threat to us. Cultural subversion is a threat, which makes me think of Bad Bunny. Like, really? Um, anyway, any more comments that help summarize what we should want before we get into the next section?
I would suspect world domination would be some of what he thinks we should want.
I think in there there's something about having um, the most powerful military and economy, and the word domination is definitely used.
Yeah.
he also says the word lethal to describe technology in the military, which is a little harrowing. Um, yeah.
Which
Mm.
militaries usually aim for lethality, but there are different ways of security. There's different understandings of security. It's a great point, Soren.
And for like restoring stuff like soft power and like influence of like trying to convince everyone that like, oh, the US is actually the good guy and you should want to follow its culture, even though it's like significantly degraded already.
Yeah.
It doesn't really have a plan for doing getting it back other than just saying, "Oh, we're so great," which
Yeah,
is at least which is like lucky. It's
yeah.
like there's not really anything you can do. That's just good.
I also saw this quote on page 4. It was wild to me because of its implications. Just we want an America that cherishes its past glories and its heroes and looks forward to a new golden age. We want a people who are proud, happy, and optimistic. We want a gainfully employed citizenry with no one sitting on the sidelines. Totally get you want an active, flourishing economy, but if you look back to nobody sitting on the sidelines during our golden age of the 1920s, like
Right.
we were struggling to get labor rights. Like we were struggling to get, minimum wages and 8-hour work days and kids out of our industrial factories. He wants to rebuild all the industrialization, which is great for everybody who's unemployed in all the small cities and towns that, you know, want to bring in jobs. But there are costs that need to be considered and need to be taken seriously. Okay, from pages 6 to 8, there's discussion about how the US can get what it wants. Can anyone summarize this section for us? It'd be great if it's someone who hasn't shared yet, but we'll give it a few more strokes to see if anyone's able.
If no one's speaking, I can fill in the gap. It's the bullet points are like basically what is echoed in the first part, like strong military, uh, good economy. He also mentions a nimble political system, that can course correct, which that's interesting.
Mhm.
And then also mentioning the dollar being on top for the world's reserve currency, which is what it currently is, which is interesting. Uh, and geography, borders, also mentioned soft power, rooting out DEI. I also that's great. Um, oh, a lot of focus on energy production too.
Yeah. Well, we really need a lot more energy for this AI boom that we hope is going to make money for our economy and not destroy our environment, but we don't talk about the environment in this document. So, yeah, thanks for telling us how this administration plans to get what it wants. These are things that we already see playing out. I found it really intriguing how much of the how was here at home. Um, but you talked about some of the things that already exist, like our currency being the most powerful and um, military being the most powerful. Like these are already realities. Um, but I think that these realities are going to be used coercively against both our enemies and our allies um, to get what we want. And my concern, you mentioned the soft power, and yeah, we still have great soft power all around the world, but that's waning. And as our democracy shakes, as there's more authoritarian overreach, democratic backsliding, as scholars say, like all of these things are causing the world to see us differently. The tariffs, like this is we've taken a huge hit on America's global reputation. All right, we'll move
Um,
on. Go ahead.
with what he did practically immediately with US aid has caused, I think it's probably millions of children to die around the country. So I would say that I don't know how well our soft power is doing. I think it's kind of really sucks right now, and it's gonna just get worse. And the world is is going to be paying attention, I think. Anyhow.
Debbie, thank you so much for mentioning the destruction of USAID. I know a lot of people have seen USAID as for a long time as one of the tools for imperial control, because it has been used coercively in many countries, right? The US comes in to provide some kind of aid or development assistance, and there's always strings attached. It's not like it's just this great goodwill offering from the American people. There's diplomatic stuff that's happening in the back. There's resources being extracted from those nations. There's other things happening. But to your point, that is a form of soft power. That is not military or economic coercion. That is a softer imperialism. And to your point, there have been, I looked up some stats the other day, hundreds of thousands of lives that have been sacrificed because we just stripped that out without building up any other kind of infrastructure or even phasing out, these programs that vulnerable people were depending on, So
Right, they were taken. Sorry.
So usually those aides, go to their servants or, the pro-American the people in that country.
the politicians are often pro-American, and the people who are staffed, who are working for USAID. But as far as the benefit on the ground, like I'm just thinking of particularly the way this has hit vulnerable refugees without food. Like those people may not have any interest in politics, but there was food in their belly, and there isn't anymore.
And the people that depended on the medication that kept them from having HIV develop into AIDS, that was just gone overnight.
All right.
To me,
go ahead, Jimney.
To me, that this national security strategy in this, what can the U.S. get, what it wants, I don't see from the first one what should the United States wants, and along with it, how we get it. There is no indication of democracy or due process, which is very, to me, is that the reason why the current situation, I see everything is coming from that source? No indication. I'm not sure why.
And when your soft power is diminishing, like,
yeah,
because we're talking about like global relations and national security as well.
Yeah.
What
But
negotiation
where are the
do you
people
have?
there? Where are the people?
Exactly.
That is my, I really don't get it.
When Soren read at the beginning that first phrase about what what we should want, it's about protecting the security of the state, like
It's not the people.
State to run. And then there's a clause at the end of that sentence about, so that the people can have prosperity and well-being. But it's secondary. It's just attached.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not centralized. It's not, the purpose isn't human security. The purpose is state security, government security. Okay, let's look at the US principles, if there are any, in this strategy. Tasha, you're making some great comments in the chat. Feel free to unmute at any point if you want to add them in. Can anyone summarize the U.S. principles in this strategy?
What page are you looking at?
8.
Yeah,
8.
page 8.
Thank you. Oh, heck, okay. I missed that big headline.
America first. He literally says, to sum it up, it's America first.
Yep.
He says he's like the president of peace, and he said he uses unconventional diplomacy, which I don't know if unconventional is the word I would use, but and then saying he like wants to like extinguish conflicts before they become bigger, which how I interpreted that is like use bad means to like go into other countries under the guise of democracy, which as we saw with like Venezuela, um, national interest, peace through strength, which is basically like intimidating our neighbors, allies, enemies into um not doing things because they're scared of America coming in. Um, predisposition to non-interventionalism, flexible realism, primacy of nations. So he's basically saying like, oh, everyone else has the right to exist. Um, and like we recognize other nation states, which that's good, I guess, that you recognize other countries. Um, like I feel like that's, in my opinion, that's like the bare minimum. But and then sovereignty and respect, trying to say like we do respect, we do see you, but we also like protect our own sovereignty. Um, sorry, there's a lot of bullet points in this section.
There are.
Balance of power. We don't that first line in the balance of power section is crazy. It's the United States cannot allow any nation to become so dominant that it could threaten our interests.
Yeah.
That was really, yeah, that was really striking to me. Um, pro-American worker, pro-growth, but with workers. Fair, but it says in the fairness section, the United States insists on being treated fairly, not the United States will treat other countries fairly. So that's an interesting notation under fairness. Competence, merit, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of glorious verbiage in there.
Yeah.
The overall kind of thing is like an awareness of like the declining of the US empire, and it's like not actually able to like rule the world anymore. And it's just trying to focus on hold on to what we have and prevent it's like kicking down the ladder instead of like trying to go higher so that no one else can challenge the what's left.
To that point, Evelyn, in the introduction, there's some talk about that quote that I shared earlier that talked about we have no interest in a country like unless like they're taking actions against us, right? So then I wondered, so what about our allies? What we just don't have we don't have allies, we don't have friends anymore. Everybody's, just thrown under the bus to coerce them to give us what what we want. So that you'll see that is a huge difference between Biden's national security strategy and this one is Biden talked about allies the whole way through. This one is very explicit in even saying that our allies or historic allies may not want to count on us anymore.
Right.
So I think, Evelyn, your point about the declining empire, like it's you have to acknowledge that. But we're trying to keep the facade. We're trying to go into this great new American age. What about our priorities in this strategy? Since in the introduction to this document, we were told that we cannot do everything, we must prioritize.
The era of mass migration is over.
That's one of our priorities. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What we're seeing. Any other priorities in this strategy?
If we're talking about is somebody else speaking?
Go ahead, Tasha.
Okay, oh, sorry. So I'm looking at peace through strength, which always means more military spending.
Yeah.
And that's that's what's happening. We're spending even more, like, who knew that was even possible than we were before on defense. And then we're forcing our so-called allies to increase their defense spending as well. And Trump's pushing more of the financial burden for basically the US military occupation of South Korea onto the Korean people.
Yes.
I was telling Jenny earlier that I had watched Amanpour today, and she had a foreign affairs person that she was talking with. And one of the things that he was saying is that Trump does not seem to appreciate the fact that even though our allies may not spend as much as we do, we've got bases all over the world. And our attacks on other countries like Iran or wherever it might be usually go from those bases because those what are the ships called, the fleets. Yeah, not everything can be done from those. Some of them have to go from land. So in Korea, it's like, don't you think maybe Korea benefits us some too? I mean, it's mutual. Anyhow, I found that very eye-opening.
With regard to are we going to say something, Jenny? With regard to something that we talked about before, I think like you know, the Donroe Doctrine, which means that, focusing more on the Western Hemisphere and maintaining like total dominance in this part of the globe. It's hard for me to believe that the US has really pivoted away from Asia. To me, it seems like the pivot to Asia is still on. I mean, the Freedom Shield joint military exercises are going to be starting soon. And even though the current president of South Korea has talked about returning OPCON to the Korean people, military OPCON, right now the U.S. is saying no, we're not going to do that. Also, Lee Jae-myung also was talking about reducing the joint military exercises, and that's not being allowed to happen. So even though there's this rhetoric that and we do see, I mean, what's happening in Cuba and Venezuela, and also Greenland. Greenland is also in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, I'm not sure like what's happened in the last few days, but it does seem like there's an uptick in this kind of aggressive, very aggressive movements against other countries in the Western Hemisphere. But it's hard for me to believe that the U.S. is going to be backing off of East Asia. To me, it seems like it's like all over the globe. It's not, he's saying we're going to focus on the Western Hemisphere, but I don't see the U.S. really pulling back.
So here's what I think is so fascinating about what you just said and the strategy as well, is that you're right. It's not as much about, oh, we're so interested in, the Western Hemisphere as much as it is about there is Chinese influence, there is Russian commerce. These things are entering our hemisphere. And so now I need to put out a big show of force to say that I've got this under control and you need to get out of here and I need to keep my people in line. because actually this foreign influence, China isn't mentioned until page 20 of this document. But there is discussion about these foreign adversaries or this foreign influence the whole way through and getting them out of our sphere. So maybe somebody can summarize what we're talking about here in this Western Hemisphere, because we see that coming through as a clear thread that China is the threat embedded in the Western Hemisphere, and we need to push all that dirty influence out so that we can keep control.
Well, I think that I don't know that I can summarize anything. Sorry, I've been really
Okay.
busy. But I know with regard to Greenland, for example, um, I think the reason why the U.S. has or Trump has focused on Greenland recently, because normally you don't hear that much about Greenland. It's just sort of there. It's very cold, and we don't hear very much about it. But because of climate change and the fact that a lot of the Arctic is starting to thaw, and Russia's very dominant in the Arctic region and has a lot of icebreakers, and because Russia and China have grown so close together, and there are going to be opportunities for more shipping through there and also resource extraction, and the U.S. wants a piece of that action. So I think that Greenland, what's happening in Greenland, it has a lot to do with that. And then
Right.
with regard to let's see, Cuba, for example, and I saw some things on social media that, because of the blockade has just gotten worse, which is just terrible for the Cuban people, that China and Russia are going to they're going to work together to get some supplies to the Cuban people so they don't starve, and so they're able to just kind of carry on with their lives and avoid a Gaza type situation where they're just completely under siege. So, yeah, so China's influence is definitely growing in, I guess, Central and South America. And, just a lot of trade and, building up all sorts of relationships, and also relationships that include trading outside of the SWIFT system, it's contributing to de-dollarization. So of course, the US, Trump's not happy about that. Because I think it's inevitable. This de-dollarization, it's inevitable. You can't stop it.
Right.
Once it started now, and a lot of it had to do with the U.S. overuse of sanctions and also stealing assets of adversarial countries like Russia's assets, freezing these assets, and it makes other countries hesitant to rely so much on the U.S. dollar. So there's that, and anyway, I'm just sort of rambling. I'll let somebody else speak.
Well, I don't think you're rambling personally. And the thing about the dollar is I don't think that he or anybody in his administration has any idea of the damage he's doing to the financial system. And I personally, maybe it's better if it's de-dollared, but America has benefited so much from having the financial system based in the dollar. And he's going in and just ripping things apart and not seeing that he's also ripping that apart. At least that's what I see and what he does. And by the way, I think that Russia and China already got some stuff to Cuba, which is good.
Yeah, from the conversation, the one idea, stood out on me, about the nature of a Donroe doctrine. This not about withdrawing the U.S. imperialism from all over the world, but instead, I think the core idea is to kick out the China from the Western Hemisphere. The U.S. still wants to keep the domination all over the world, including East Asia and Middle East, but using this doctrine U.S. wants to, kick them out from the Western Hemisphere. I think that's what it is.
I
Makes sense.
absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Debbie.
Oh, I'm agreeing with that.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Moonjo just said, but I'd also like to say, like, some people are saying that, like, Trump, the reason why he's like bullying these country, like, kind of relatively small countries, like, Greenland's a big country, but it has kind of a small presence on the world stage, and countries like Venezuela and Cuba is that, like, militarily they're not at the same level as the US. And so they're easily I mean, Trump's definitely a bully. And so
Yeah.
he's bullying these other countries and they're kind of like, I'm not sure that it's quite right to call them low-hanging fruit, but he wants to have some like victories, because the truth is, even though you don't hear this um, in the mainstream media, the Ukraine war is not going well, and the U.S. is very much involved in that, even though it's not like officially involved. It's very much involved. It's going very poorly, and so it doesn't reflect well on the U.S. and European countries that it's going so badly. Um, and so Trump wants, it's like a shot of Viagra for him to bully these smaller countries and to
Right.
have he can kind of claim them as victories, like, oh, that we captured, even though they totally kidnapped somebody who was involved in drug traffic. I mean, Maduro and his wife, that, which would, from all I can tell, that was just a total lie. But it made, if he felt really like he could brag about it and he could feel really strong.
That was another thing that I mean, he's continually putting out, these 8 wars that I've stopped, right? And he's just parroting that same ridiculous lie over and over and over again. Because if you look at what he did, I mean, I've looked into a few of those peace agreements, right? And obviously we've been following what's going on in Gaza, but then let's 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 take one that's maybe not so commonly talked about, Cambodia and Thailand.
Mm.
They have had a border dispute since the 1950s, and that it dates all the way back to when the French colonized Cambodia and drew border lines. And so they took it to the International Court of Justice. They got a ruling, but the ruling wasn't as precise as it could have been. And so there's confusion around it. And so Trump comes in and talks to some people and gets them to stop shooting guns for a few days and declares that he's made peace, and it just strokes his ego. He feels like the best man in the world, and whatever. I don't understand why personal ego is counting so much into this, because we're talking about the future of nations, and we're talking about a multipolar reality that's emerged, and we have to think wisely, intelligently, competently about strategies for future security. Because if Americans want future security, there's different ways to provide it. And we can enhance our soft power and we can reduce our military spending. There's so, like, just the definitions of security blow my mind.
Yeah. And part of the problem from my viewpoint is that someone has been put into power who has a horrible hole in his heart and his soul. I mean, everything. Nothing has been, his needs have not been met. And he's trying to meet them by, as you said, going into these little countries that he can bully. Um, and he's destroying our safety as he does these things. And he doesn't care because he's doing what he wants to do.
He's accelerating the decline of the US.
Yep.
He is. In Biden's national security strategy, the regions as they were listed was Asia first, Europe second, the Americas third, Middle East fourth, and Africa fifth. In this one, we had the Americas first, like you talked about, Tasha, really to expel this foreign influence, like you said, Munjo. And now we're on Asia. And so what's the big concerns in Asia? Can anyone summarize this?
I can just give you Taiwan and China.
Taiwan and China are
Two
mentioned.
or what?
Taiwan and China are mentioned, and something that's very interesting here, so whenever past administrations, Republican and Democrat, would speak about China and Taiwan, they would refer to the three communiques, they would refer to, the one China policy. That rhetoric has changed under this administration. There was no mention of any of those, like the three communiques or anything in this strategy. Maybe that's because they're dumbing it down for anybody to read, but I don't think so. I think there's been some bilateral talks with China about the rhetoric. So I think there's actually, and this is one of the concerns, like if Trump wants to go into a spheres of power thing geographically, I don't think that's possible. But if he wants to have power over in the Western hemisphere, and China and Russia can share power over in Asia in some way, or like what kind of little empire worlds is he trying to create? Are they trying to create in their conversations? I don't know, but what do you hear in the Asia region national security strategy?
He wants Americans to invest in China, American businesses to invest in China. I'm confused.
That is confusing.
Is he specifically saying China or is he saying Asian countries? I felt like there was in this section, there was a lot of talk about, it wasn't the same language that Biden was using about, our main pacing challenge is China. We've got to confront China. We've got to, but he's, and okay, and like, so if we talk about Korea, the Korean troops or the American troops in Korea are there ostensibly to defend South Korea from North Korean attack. And that's the only reason they're there. That's the agreement, right? But this security strategy says what they're not supposed to say, which is that it's actually because they're facing off towards China and they're there to protect the South China Sea and trade routes.
Mm-hmm.
And it says that we need to get our allies on board with us here about that's what we're doing. So maybe we can expect to see the Pentagon and the State Department trying to renegotiate the terms for the troops in Korea. That's something we could look out for, maybe. But they also don't really seem to care about legalities. So maybe they're just going to operate as though this is why we're there, even though that's not why we're there on paper.
Yeah. And isn't there a nuclear bomb in Korea? Or maybe I'm wrong about that, but I thought there was.
Not deployed on the Korean Peninsula, but the US nuclear umbrella is supposed to cover Korea where they attacked.
Okay.
But there's a movement, a domestic movement within South Korea that wants to develop their own nuclear weapons. And we see that in Europe now too, with these shifts and changes.
Yeah.
The mercurial personality of our leader and the fact that it might change 4 years from now, like it just keeps changing. So we see a new nuclear arms race with the START treaty expiring last
Right.
week.
Right.
All right, I'm going to go on to the next section unless anyone else has more comments on what we see from the strategy related to Asia. This last one is going to mix Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, put them all together.
For
Yeah, in this
Asia,
section,
Go ahead.
oh, go ahead,
go ahead.
Evelyn.
It's like for Asia, it's talking about like erasing trade deficits and with China specifically and encouraging investment in like the TPP nations. And like for like have countries, they want countries to invest in the US instead of China, basically, and buy products, US products, invest in the US and like avoid China.
What page does this section begin on? Please.
19.
Thank you.
Yes,
And
they want
like
investment from Asian countries in the US to build up our industrial sector. We've already seen that going on, happening, trade deals or deals, this 350 billion or whatever it is deal. Go ahead, Evelyn, you had more to say.
no, we're just doing page numbers. Like first, it's like the thing we're talking about the Indo-Pacific nations is on like and boosting their economies is on 19, and then page 20 is like we're gonna erase the trade deficits and like build up military strength around Taiwan and the South China Sea to like contain China or whatever, and like prevent it's like and ensure that U.S. trade can go through the South China Sea.
Yeah, the US is interested in those trade routes not being disrupted. And why? Because if those trade routes were disrupted, people back home in America would feel it. The economy would be immediately affected. So this is about stability back home by maintaining control. And just maintaining the open they just want the money flowing. Keep the money flowing. As long as the money's flowing, we'll be content and happy and go along with whatever. Heidi, do you want to speak up at all about the point that you made in the chat? All right, we've got about 25 minutes left, so let's turn to the Middle East.
Oh yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was just wanted to point out there's no mention of North Korea in the section.
None. Not in the
Yeah.
whole document.
Yeah, right. That was many Korean news articles or opinions that talked about the absence of North Korea. Indeed.
Oh, go ahead, Munjo.
Oh yeah. I mean, just
Well, I was going to
just
say
it.
it's hard to know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. At least it's not identified.
Sorry about that. Yeah, if you don't
Sorry.
mind, I'm sorry. Do you mind? Can I just say something real quick?
Yeah, of
So
course.
I called North Korea the other day. I called several of the embassies out in North Korea, and I just learned that there's an embassy in UK. I just pinpointed. It took me like months to figure out where that embassy is in the UK because it's very well hidden. But what I've learned is that America already has what they want from South Korea, and essentially, what America is doing right now is they're trying to use South Korea to get into North Korea because North Korea has all the minerals and they need the minerals. North Korea is already outsourcing quite a few of those minerals to several of all the embassies that are within North Korea. That's the embassies like India and Pakistan. The embassies in North Korea at this moment they're doing business with them currently. So they're already doing it. And then China, of course, China outsources minerals and the US buys them from China. So essentially they are buying minerals just indirectly from North Korea. And from my understanding is that what the US wants is they don't want to buy, they're sick and tired of buying indirectly. They want to buy directly from North Korea. How can they do that? Well, they first need to establish a situation like Swedish has. The Swedish right now currently North Korea owes the Swedish government millions, multi-million dollars. The Swedish government is holding that over the North Koreans' head and basically saying, look, we know that you owe us money. You can't pay that back in dollars. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an embassy in your country. We're going to monitor your country. You're going to let us because you owe us money. And then and then you're going to sell us your minerals. I'm going to outsource these to other countries, which essentially is what they're doing. I called the embassy. I called the North Korean Swedish embassy recently, and and I spoke to them, and I called and I asked the gentleman on the phone if that was something that could be a possibility, and he was really offended by me. He even said to me, he would not discuss any of that information with me, and if I wanted to discuss that information, I would need to call the Swedish government foreign affairs department, and he was very upset with me. And I said, okay, I'll be happy to do that, no problem. But the point is that right now the U.S. government, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to find out how they can leverage what they can do to get what they can leverage against North Korea to basically force North Korea to do what they to let them to let South Korea into North Korea, essentially letting America into North Korea. That's what they're trying to do. And North Korea is like, no, 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 no. We're not going to do anything. We're going to be very careful not to go down that path again, because currently we owe like 300, we owe millions and millions of dollars to Sweden. We're not going down that route again. North Korea does not want to owe anybody anything. They don't want to be owned. They don't want to owe people anything. They don't want people in their business, period. And so, that's why they're very, but North Korea at the same time, like I told somebody else the other day, I mentioned to them, I said, North Korea, they're, there's a lot of talk about how they're going to strike and how they're going to release nuclear bombs on their countries. That's just a deterrence. That's like an insurance. The nuclear bombs are essentially an insurance to deter other countries from, invading them or causing their people supposedly more trauma, which they already have, a lot of trauma from. But I think that from after I called around, and then I found a couple of other Swedish embassies throughout North Carolina that were very well hidden. And then I did some more digging, and I found more of them throughout the United States, and including the German embassies are very well hidden. And there's a reason for that, because a lot of these embassy is not just a place to go and get a visa. Embassy is
Yeah.
a place to also go
Heidi,
and do, yeah.
Heidi, yeah,
Yeah.
it's sorry to interrupt, but
No, no, I guess
yeah,
what I'm saying is that
Jenny
if
under pressure not to,
yeah. So I guess where I'm going with this
overrun
is
the
that
meeting.
I'm yeah, no, so I guess where I'm going with this is that why do I feel like my personal belief is why do I feel like North Korea, United States wants to kind of have better relationships with Korea? My personal opinion is not because they want to care about not so much humanitarian. I think it's more about trying to figure out how to get the minerals and how to establish control over North Korea. It has nothing to do with the humanitarian efforts.
Of course not. Yeah.
Heidi, I really appreciate the narrative that you're painting there, because that can help us understand North Korea is not mentioned in this national security strategy, but Europe, the Middle East, Africa are mentioned, and we see the United States wanting to kind of get in and exploit resources in the Western Hemisphere. They actually say that they want to use their intelligence services to identify, they said this in the national security strategy, they want to identify minerals and other resources they can extract in South America. Okay. They also, oh, that wasn't, I'm not agreeing with that. They also want to be using their embassies, like you're talking about, as business places. They want to make deals. They want everyone to be making deals and advocating for the US government. In Africa, there's a lot of resources. One of these quote unquote peace agreements that Trump supposedly made with the Congo and Rwanda is about extracting resources. It's about extracting minerals. That's what it is. It's security guarantees for what we can take. It's not peace. Peace is the absence of violence. Peace is the presence of human security, not militarized security. I'm gonna kind of breeze through these themes because we've got about, less than 20 minutes left. You can stay on longer if you want to. Feel free to drop off at the half hour if you need to. What made this strategy so hard for me to read was the clear identitarian, alt-right, white supremacist, Christian nationalist themes that I heard attacking multiculturalism, diversity, immigration, globalization, and universal human rights, which again never got a mention. But these are described as things that degrade our institutions and hold us back. they said things they said these things while just upholding this vague claim that the USA's national character was decent and that there was some kind of civilizational advantage that we have, this shared culture that we have with Europeans, which they made sure to mention did not include immigrants to Europe. So this explicit discussion of cultural subversion in the United States as a threat to combat, human migration as something to be stopped, um, and opposed because it would reinstill complacency, or sorry, not complacency. It would reinstill a culture of competency was the words they used in US workplaces. Even the Donroe doctrine, all of this is working to keep white people supreme.
Right.
So what ideologies do you see shaping this strategy? What are implications for Americans from the Korean diaspora, and what might be the implications for Korea peace of this kind of ideology ruling the current fading global superpower?
Getting him out of office somehow. It's very hard for me to, well, actually, I confess I did not read it. Part of it's because I'm dealing with sprained foot, but part of it's because I just can't deal with anything having to do with him. But to have someone that does not understand that this world is multicultural, and that's by design, and stopping migration is idiotic. I don't understand him anyhow. Sorry.
I'm really curious what Koreans and Korean Americans think about these implications,
Yeah.
if there are any thoughts.
I think I confess I was so naive to see United States as a Korean American. After reading this one and knowing the situation of this administration, the actions and kind of, to me, it's a kind of brutality. It doesn't have any humanity mind. And is this the America? And is this the really America I dreamed of? And is this the place where I can teach my grandkids? I don't know. And this whole, the language here, one word I say the dominance. A dominance for what? Why dominance is so like a powerfully implied on all these sentences. And that's why we need to live together. That is what it bothers me. I don't know what to do. And as a person of Korea peace yearning, there is no way for us, even like all kinds of bills we contact the Congress and Senate and then try to make it co-sponsoring. What for? Because it doesn't work. And that is what I feel right now. I don't know what to do from now on. I'm so thankful, Jenny, for sharing this without knowing this kind of background. With the minds of we need to live together in harmony with all the humanity, which as a believer of God, we need to work together. It's better to live well-being for everyone single, just a little better than now. Those who don't have food on the table, they have to have a food on the table. That's why we are working together. And the government, to my knowledge, to my understanding, they are the ones who really try to be a good governing body to help those systems for the people. Those who are poor get better, a little bit better, not like a greedy, but at least have something to live, depend on and live happily. And those who, I don't know, but this government is like, we need to be superpower.
Mm.
We need to be superpower for what? That is, I think I cannot sleep tonight.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
Yeah,
That's not good.
really, but thank you so much for sharing this. So at least now I can see myself. What shall I do? Maybe it will give me another way of thinking who I am. Thank you.
I hope that, like, I've been so inspired by what's been going on in Minnesota as far as grassroots resistance and care for your neighbor, knowing your neighbor's name, knowing, being in touch with each other. That's a rapid response kind of community weaving that we need to do. Um, I think in like domestic resistance. But when we're thinking also about Korean peace, I remember Dr. Hannes Park. He he taught that he believed Korean diasporas were going to be the best agents of peace building on the Korean Peninsula. And I've been hearing from Korean Americans here reaching out to families saying, hey, here in Korea, it's safe. Um, the standard of living isn't so bad. You can get a visa. Like they've been reaching out and saying, why don't you come over? And so I was thinking like, who knows? But it might be possible that there would be an influx of Korean diaspora who would be peace-minded, who would be multicultural because they've lived in the United States, they've had to deal with that, who would carry that in here, who knows what kind of catalyst for peace that could be. So I've thought about that a little bit, but I don't know if that's a crazy thought.
Yeah, Jenny, one more thing is that I know that I'm so thankful we have a 4-year terms of presidency. So we have a changes. So
Yes.
doing that, I should not give up my hope. But this is a general mentality or the general way of looking at that, the supremacy and the power. That is, maybe every countries have that kind of dream or yearning for. So it's not only United States of America,
No.
but yet, yeah. So in this kind of setting, still I believe that this election and people's mind like it's a fluctuate, like it's a river, like it's going, but sometimes there is a rocks, or so sometimes they have a little fault, even though it goes in one direction toward the ocean, but yet there is some ways to twist. So that is my hope right now. Who knows?
I think your hope and you're wanting to redefine what we think of as security
Yeah,
is really important.
yeah.
It's fundamental. Because what this administration is describing is not. This is not security. It's making us less safe, like Tasha said. It's making the whole world less safe.
It's like we are collapsing. It's not only United States, it's all collapsing to the bottom, like what do you call that? How do you, like a burn to ash? That kind of feeling, if we keep going to this direction. This is, maybe I'm so naive, maybe, I'm not sure. It's not the right direction anyway.
Don't discount what you think and feel, because you're right. Things are going in not a good direction.
In some countries, the government actually takes care of their people, though. Like I live in Seattle, and I live
Yeah,
in a decent neighborhood. It's not a poor neighborhood, but there are a lot of because there's a big park next to the condos where I live. There, I see like all these homeless people who are addicted to drugs, and not all of them are addicted to drugs, but in just it's really sad to see people like this on a daily basis who are suffering so much. You know, some of them have made poor choices, but our government does not take care of its people. And
that's right.
there are countries there are other countries in the world where you see they have different systems where the people are not living like this, where people have guaranteed housing and employment and education or educate access to education and medical care. This and even in this country, I have to say, because you know, I was born in the 1960s, like I'm not a young person. Things used to be like better. They used to be a lot easier and not necessarily easy for everyone, but life has gotten really hard for people. Like I see a lot of, I do a lot of organizing with people in their 20s and not just with the people I organize with, but I think that like for the younger generations, it's the future they have to look forward to or the opportunities. It's very different than, when I was in my 20s. Things have not gotten easier. And a lot of that, I believe, has to do with the policies that our government follows. I feel like when you have effective leaders, the leaders take care of their people. And I see no evidence of that in this country. The people, there are some flowery words in this national security strategy. When I was reading it a few days ago, I was like, gee, some of this sounds good. I wish it were true. You know? They at least made it sound good. Some of it didn't sound good, but some of it did. I was like, oh, when I was in grade school, I might have read this and felt inspired.
Right.
But now, like, I'm a little bit more cynical than that. But
Mhm.
in any event, our government doesn't take care of its people, and it makes me very angry. If you read some of like what's been released about the Epstein files, it means that
Yeah.
people at the highest levels of government and in industry in our country, they're not good people,
Right.
not good
Yeah.
people at all.
Yeah.
I have an American friend who's married to a Swedish man, and they live in Sweden, and they're bringing their daughters up there. And she has told me before that in Sweden, people would not be going through what they're going through here, like the homelessness. She said the government would step in and do something. And so Tasha is totally right. Our government, this government, does not take care of its people. Otherwise, why would a lot of people not be able to afford health care
Mhm.
or having an operation that would save their life?
Yeah, and Washington State has gotten a lot worse that they had for people, who weren't working and they're too young for Medicare, they had all these healthcare subsidies and now they're gone. And so a lot of people are choosing not to have health insurance because they simply can't afford. Like my premium is really, really high.
Yeah. And mine is a Medicare premium, which I try not to think about because it's like things would be different if I wasn't paying so much for that. But in this country, um, it's if you can do it, it's important, but it shouldn't be. It should not be that way. And a lot of people in this country think that Europe is on a welfare system, which is ridiculous. It's just that they're taking care of their people.
That's human security is something very different than military national security, right?
Security.
Yes.
Very different. Heidi made a great point in the chat here about how Trump has a very limited window of opportunity to advance his policy. That's why he's ramming everything through. She also mentions how stockpiling and controlling critical minerals can be seen as part of a broader effort to strengthen domestic industrial and technological capacity before geopolitical and financial constraints tighten further. And she's right. That's the reasoning that many people supported Donald Trump, is they believed that he would strengthen our economy, he would revitalize industry. These are things he says he wants to do in this national security thing. And if they succeeded, they would help some American workers. But there is also a global cost, and there is also a way to do it, that's not coercive, that's not, my fear is that Trump is taking our country back to this sort of neo-mercantilist sort of, you know what mercantilism was back in the day when the European empires would send out their ships and their militaries to go extract resources, take them back home,
Right.
develop them, then carry them back to those same countries to sell them. So they're profiting at multiple points. They're profiting through the transportation. It's just about collecting wealth. Tariffs, trade balances, the Federal Reserve's sovereign wealth funds, resource extraction from different parts of the world. That's all part of that system. And Trump is obsessed with all of those things. So he's moving us away from this neoliberal order, and that's fine. But what are we creating in its place?
Well,
This is an important time because we are in such a flux, and like a flux across the world. There's going to be a lot of power vacuums. And like Jungnae is saying, we need to find out what is actually security. Can we live in harmony together? How do we build up institutions that do that? In our local communities, on a very local level, we can be doing that. We can be dreaming about wider. Maybe we have connections to be building wider, but we can all be building locally. Munjo, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's very clear, what the security, is about. Here, power and money, but not security of people's dignity and lives. That's very clear.
Yeah.
yeah. And I'm not okay with the neoliberal going away because that has to do with taking care of people, having people valued above things and above power and domination, and having a leader that understands that. And I think that's part of what neoliberalism is.
Well, part of the neoliberal order, I mean, the neoliberal order arose out of, the post World War II era.
Yeah.
But before this, we had a lot of constant war, and they put a lot of systems and things in place that were unjust, that benefited some over others, that kept power centralized in some nations' hands over others, kept the US as the center, so like there's a lot of problems with the neoliberal order. But what are we replacing it with? If it's being destroyed, and this is Europe is having to decide if they're going to try to build new institutions or try to kick the US out of institutions. Like, are they going to marginalize? How are they going to navigate that? So they've got their heads together. And I've been wondering what it would look like for Asian nations to be doing that, because the US right now under this administration is moving to a lot of bilateral negotiations. They're going to try to just talk to Korea to get a trade deal. They're going to try to just talk to this country to get a trade deal. And they're going to hold certain things over their head until they agree.
I know.
All across Africa, they've been doing this, like, because those countries have less leverage on the US. But the middle powers, like South Korea, what if more middle powers were getting themselves together, like is happening in Europe right now, and figuring out what institutions are we going to build that value human security? What are we going to build that's not based on power, domination, military control and coercion, economic control and coercion? Because if we get back into a spheres of power and it's just like China, Russia, US, the biggest militaries, the biggest economies run the world, that's not good for any of the little players.
Not good for anybody.
Well, it's good for the people on top, but they are not everybody, and they are not many. They're not most. And it's not good for them if you think in terms of what's good for the soul.
Well,
It's
yeah,
destructive for them.
ethically.
Yeah.
If they have no ethics, in my opinion, they have nothing. I I will forthrightly admit that I am absolutely brokenhearted over what I'm seeing happen, and I cry a lot. So,
Yeah.
Anyhow.
There have been a lot of folks who haven't said anything. I want to give you the floor if you want to say something, if you want to express what's burning inside of you. There's several of us that have taken a lot of space, so we're going to sit back and open the floor.
I agree with a lot of you in the sense of like what's happening is terrible and devastating. But I guess like the silver lining for me, at least when I look at this, like blatant um fascism and authoritarianism is the world is like waking up because I feel like in my opinion, from what I've read about like US history and stuff, America has had like an iron fist on the world for not just Trump, like bipartisan kind of thing. And I think decentering the US um is a good thing as we kind of touched on. Obviously the way it would happen probably is not the best, but at the same time, um like in the US, I think a lot of people are like US citizens as well are waking up to um like the US's uh again like authoritarian ways. And I think if I guess like Kamala had one or something like that, a lot more people would be content because it's not as out in the open. Like people's lives might have been a little bit better, but at the same time, the US would still be doing a lot of stuff it's doing, just not as blatantly uh, racist and America first supremacist kind of way. I guess like that's how kind of I look at the situation. And my hope though is the US is the current global superpower, and there's always been like a global superpower that has had like kind of this iron fist of like terror. And my hope is that we finally are globalized enough to learn from the fact that that one superpower dominance model doesn't really work. And hopefully the US is like the last global superpower that has to be like authoritarian and have this like power over everyone else. And hopefully it can pave for a world that is like actually all countries are working together for the betterment of humanity instead of one or a few countries are like terrorizing other countries.
I agree.
We've gone past our time. I didn't want to close it without any of the quiet people having a chance, but I'll give you 5 more seconds if any of you want to speak.
Okay, I'll say something. Thanks for opening the floor. I think the U.S. drastically changed when Obama became the president of the United States. I think that was a transitional time that everybody was looking for, but it just changed the dynamic of how people rule in this country. And basically, it was a wake-up call. Sorry for the white people here. It was a wake-up call for the white people. They suddenly realized that they don't have the power anymore, or they might not have the power. So my take on it is that I still think as American, that America has the best hope to have peace around the world. I know that what's going on now is very devastating because we're going through another transition. But if you look at where we come from, the suffrage time. I mean, women wasn't even able to vote. I mean, to think about that. I mean, if you look at the Constitution, we have, Andy Kim as a senator, uh, a, I mean, a first Korean senator. And I look at country like Korea. I mean, although I'm from there, I can't imagine a foreigner becoming a congressman there or a CEO or in Japan, you literally have to change your name to. I mean, so I look at the world as if we look at the world as one. I don't see China having a foreign born somebody that could go into a Chinese party and becoming a leader there. I just don't see it. So I'm not condoning what's happening here today, but I still think that America still has a chance to be a peaceful to make peaceful around the world. And I think meeting like this, having a discussion about how we can improve our well-being is a very I think that's still it gives me hope. It gives me hope that we could one day become better to make this world a better place. Um, and I think that new leaders will I think emerge from this era I still think that um, uh, we need to uh, constantly, fight constantly to have this battle to believe in the fact that we are all Americans. I mean, I know that once you become naturalized, we still call ourselves Korean American, but why? I mean, we are American, period. If you look at as being American, then we don't have to talk about the other race. We just have to talk about our own well-being to make ourselves better. That's what I think. And uh, I think this the whole thing about the DEI going away, I don't think it will ever go away. I mean, we still have people that will merge from this situation, and I think we'll have a better leader as a result of what's happening today. So, and to learn from it and to study it and to make something better for ourselves. That's what I think.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts, Casey. Well, there's a world that we want. There's the world that we've got, and that's something that they didn't analyze the current world that they were in this strategy, if you notice that. It was just what do we want and how we're going to get it. It was all the domination. But the world that we have, you touched on it, Casey, it's already shifted, it's already changed. We are agents of change, each of you are, in your relationships, in your communities. And I hope that we keep our heads together, we care for one another, we connect, we broaden our social capital, our social resources. We work together, we build together, we take care. Like Tasha was saying, if the government's failing, let's keep calling them to do better, calling them to reallocate resources to where we want to see them. And let's do as much as we can with what resources we have. And let's build the world that we want to see. Because the one that's crumbling is not inevitable. And we're going to need structures in the future. So thanks for taking time to be here with us tonight, all of you. Sorry for keeping you 11 minutes over.
That's fine. It was well worth it.
Next